I think it's safe to say that you've pretty much done everything in wrestling, haven't you?
That's fair. That's very fair.
Oh, dear. I mean, how the hell does all that come about, man?
Time. um, just you don't stop. You just have to keep moving. That's the biggest thing. You want to do something, okay, then do it. And when I first got in wrestling, it was one of those, I want to learn this business. And so I really started by learning the business and even before I got trained. So I learned what it was like to be backstage. I learned what it was like to understand the finances and business end of it before I really got trained to do it. So
There you go. So we're talking to the president of wrestling. We've got loads of stuff to talk about, but as always, roll the intro. Bill, it's great to have on the show, mate. How's the week been?
it's been a week. It's been a very interesting week.
Interesting in what way? Or can't we say?
So, certainly as an American, this was our presidential election year. We just had our election day the other day, so certainly that is top of mind and a lot of conversation. But just life is interesting. I am a huge Halloween nut, so like I go all out, I decorate crazily. So it went from Halloween last week to then election week to it's a regular off. I also have an office job outside of my life in wrestling and acting, and so was like, all right, this is going to be a long week, and there's a lot of stuff happening. I'm hiring for people, so.
Wow, that's crazy, man. And how do you juggle, obviously, having like a full-time job in wrestling? How do you actually juggle that?
A lot of it is, as I'm also hitting things under my desk. A lot of it is just timing and coordination. Like I'm very fortunate. I'm at a position where I have a lot of time off that I utilize. So when I travel, like for Revolver, I know. Okay, I'm going to go out the day before. I'm going to have to take some time off to be able to go out there. Do I have that? And so sometimes it's just balancing. What can I do, in the time frame I have to do it. I'm very fortunate that my office job also allows me to work from home a day or two a week sometimes. And so I take advantage of that. I know that means that like when the end of the day comes, I'm able then to jump right back into like, okay, I need to send out this press release, or I'm going to work on the independent wrestling calendar. And so it's sort of like you have to realize when your downtimes are going to be able to capitalize on them.
And that kind of leads me on to my next point is, do you ever get time to obviously like settle down, or is it you're always busy?
I stay busy. I'm one of those people that like my brain doesn't want to shut off. Last night I had one of those like I could just sit here and like just play video games for a couple hours. Oh no, I'm gonna work on the indie calendar because I'm not doing anything else right now.
And what's the go-to game? What we're playing at the moment?
Fortnite.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry. So actually last night I turned on my Xbox and I went to Star Trek Online because I thought they had updated the new episode and they hadn't. So I then turned it off and went over to Fortnite. And then was like, I don't know if I want to play. I played a custom game. I played one of those like big melee games. And I was like, I'm not really feeling this right now. And so I turned that off.
Oh, dude, that's brilliant. We're 4 minutes in and we're talking about Fortnite.
I played Marvel Snap on my on mobile, so.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I'm not too fond of that game, but I can get behind it. Oh, dear. Yeah, so we're talking obviously about your wrestling side. We actually mentioned that in the introduction. So let's start obviously at the beginning, shall we? I mean, how obviously did you get into wrestling from the very beginning?
Yeah, I was a fan as a kid. As I think a lot of people get into it that way. And I was also that kid when I reached middle school that sent letters to the WWE and WCW at the time and ECW, and there was another Global, and was like, I think kids should be able to wrestle on television. And I got a letter back from WCW, which was actually a bigger solicitation to buy a book. And then I got a phone call from the on-screen commissioner of Global Wrestling Federation. I was like 12. So it was neat. And even then I was like, oh, WCW wants me to buy a book. Okay.
That's brilliant. And what did they actually say?
It was like a book of I think promotions and training facilities.
Fascinating. This is really fascinating chat already. I'm really intrigued here.
I need to, because it was funny because I got one response and then like a couple months go by and then got another response. And I was like, oh, and it was pretty much the top was a little different, but the bottom was exactly the same. Like, and you can buy our book at da, 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 da.
That was brilliant. So how do you go from that to really obviously starting to train to wrestle?
So, I kind of knew, and then I got the letter. In the letter it referenced, you have to get trained and you typically have to be over 18 to be able to train. And about, I think a year or two later, I then met somebody who was going through training. And it was like, oh, okay, so training school is a thing. So I knew throughout my entire high school time, oh, training needs to be a thing. And when I graduated high school, if I'm being really real about a lot of stuff, I was 5'6" and realized even at in that time in wrestling in the way old days that's short. and was like, okay, realistically, what are my odds of making it or doing something bigger? I want to go to college. I want to need to have an opportunity to have a backup plan should this not work out. So I'm going to go forward with that plan, because I have to pay for one of them and I can't pay for both. And so I go to college. But at the same time, that's when I started working backstage for different companies. I remember like my first day of going someplace was, hey, your ring crew, your music guy, your security if needed. I think my second show I did ring announcing. And what else? I mean, I did get in and train with some of them. By that point, I was competing in judo and jiu-jitsu and had done amateur wrestling. So it was like, all right. So they knew I could do some physical stuff. And some people would like show me stuff here and there, but definitely was not in ring training until later. And then I started out my college at a community college. It was more affordable, and then went to a bigger university. And when I transferred about that time, I was told by a doctor I had a precancerous condition.
Wow.
And in my brain, I processed that as, well, it's going to become cancer, and that's going to mean the end. I need to jump on this now. Come to find out, the doctor was full of it and I did not have this condition.
Wow.
So in a good way, that's great. Like, it did not have this precancerous thing. But it then started me on a path of like, oh, I was able to figure out the finances of how I could afford college and go to training at the same time. It was difficult. My training place was 2.5 hours away from where I went to university. So that definitely took some configuring to do.
So how do you also go from single wrestler to literally like dabbling in absolutely everything? I mean, looking at you, manager, play-by-play, color commentator, trainee, on-air official. I mean, you've done it all, man. I mean, how did you go from one to the other?
Again, a lot of that is time. Like I said, when I started, I was working backstage, so I started to learn the business and all of the aspects of it. And when I jumped over to wrestling, well, not every time you reach out to a promoter, they need that. Or they want you to cut a promo, so you need to know how to talk. I'm the very first time I ever did commentary, I did horrible. I did really bad. And then the second time I was finally ever asked was for a company called Pro Wrestling Unplugged, and the promoter's like, you talk so well, I think you can do this. And I was like, I did so bad before. Like, he's like, well, practice and audition, and so like I put together like a little promo kit. And he was like, Phil, I think this is fine. And I worked with somebody named Ed House, and he had been known for like working with CZW before. And we did our first show together. And at the end of the first show, he's like, you lied to me. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, you've done this before. And I was like, yes, but not well. And he's like, no, you did fine. This was great. I would love to do this with you. And so it showed like, okay, so now I have this other little place I can go to in my wrestling life. And randomly, at that point in time, not a lot of promoters like really wanted promos, and there wasn't the availability of social media in the 2000s per se to even post promos, because you didn't have a lot of capability to record video to post up easily. You could, but it took some extra doing. And so it wasn't really until like the last, like maybe the 2010s, people were like, oh, you can cut a promo anywhere. Um, and I found that I had a really good ability, and that commentary really helped me to be a better speaker, um,
Mhm.
both in my wrestling life and my non-wrestling life. And so then all of a sudden it was like, oh, wait a minute, you can talk too? So that actually helped me get more bookings, because then people realized, oh, you can talk. Which then uh, towards the end of the 2010s, I knew I was having a physical issue in my neck, and wasn't sure what it was, but I was like, I have a bad feeling. And so like I was starting to go down the path of, let me look at, well, what other roles can I do? If I want to be still involved, but I can't always be physical because I'm hurt, well, what other options are there? And one of them was to be this authority figure. And then come to find out, I had to get neck surgery. So I have a metal plate and 6 screws in my neck. So I had the edge surgery, I had the fusion at the exact same place, C5, C6, C7, and spinal stenosis. So it was like, all right, got to fix this. And so it was like it was I'm trying to think. It was a good 6 months before I took my first bump again, and that was more accidental. And then it was a good year before I really got back into the ring. And even then, it's like I've had to be very mindful of what I can do and what I cannot do. Um, so it left me open with this other avenue of, well, I can still talk, I can still function. I've learned all these other things, and now I also know more production things. I know video work. My graphic skills could be greatly improved, but I've even learned that to do. So now it's like, wait a minute, I do have all of this in my arsenal now. And that's sort of what led to being called the president, was because I started feeling like people are coming to me to do all this stuff and to run all this stuff for them. I really am behind the scenes running a lot. So it really is like I'm running this place. So I am the president of wrestling.
And that's probably a nice little message thing there. Is like you said. I mean, you obviously had the thing in your neck and stuff like that, but it didn't stop you. Do you know what I mean? You kept on going, and I feel like a lot of people, do you know what I mean, could do the same thing. Do you know what I mean? You're not restricted. You still obviously want to get involved and stuff.
Mhm. I mean, I'm mindful. Like, I'm not about to take a super. If somebody was like, "Hey, Phil, climb on top of this building and jump off," like I'm probably going to be like, no, thank you." Just because I know there's some physical limitation there. But for the most part, I'm able to go. I mean, over the summer, I did tear my ACL, so I had to have ACL surgery in my left knee. So I'm more limited from that now than my neck. So
Oh, wow. And how are you obviously health wise today? You all right?
except for the recovery from the knee, I'm doing really good. The issue that I mentioned, the precancerous stuff, I still have that issue, but it's not as severe as they were fearing. And over time, there's been new treatments for it. So it was a digestive issue, and so it now has been better treated, and it's better managed.
Awesome, awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about the commentary thing. So, what's the difference between play by play and obviously color? I mean, obviously some people know, some people don't, but from your point of view, obviously doing both, what's the differences?
So I will say even that's modified over time. Because at first, play by play was the guy who's like, here's the action, here are the moves that are happening. Let me tell you what this move is called, and how this transitions from the next move. It's a little bit more on the technical side. The color guy was telling you more of the story. And typically in wrestling parlance was the bad guy, was the heel, like a little bit more like the when you think bad guy, you think Bobby Heenan. Um, like, this do-gooder, like the goody two shoes, what is he doing? Um, and that has modified over the course of time. Even now when you watch WWE, they're also knowledgeable of the product. They're all telling stories. They're all saying, oh, remember when we just saw when we just had Crown Jewel, this happened. And so now we're here tonight on SmackDown, and this is going to be happening. They have to be able to tell that narrative. It's a different type of audience. They have a weekly television program, so they're firing content very fast. They have to be super knowledgeable on the fly, plus the voice that's in their ear also on live television, telling them what to do and say sometimes as they're talking. I've had that and I hate it. But hey, you have to roll with it.
And how do you deal with it? Is it just one of those in the moment type thing? If you're like in a zone, how do you deal with obviously like the voices in your head?
I will say it depends on the person. Other person has to be good at. Is it just giving your timing cues, which is great. You have to pay attention, but you don't have to be like so attentive as to listen to instruction while you're talking. I did a live broadcast, for an event in Pennsylvania, and it went to like their local cable network, and it was so difficult because he's like telling me like, okay, and here's everything that's about to happen, and I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and make sure this guy does this, and I'm like, I am actively talking right now, with the camera on me. It wasn't even like a match was happening, and I'm here, and I can like sort of hide, but I'm listening. The camera was on us, and they're giving us those cues, and so I remember when that first time that happened, I was like, my brain just didn't know how to compute for half a second, and then it was like, okay, I got it. By the end of it, I was like, I was able to better process, but actively, I think at one point I was actively going like, I felt like Uhura on Star Trek, like I'm like listening to the conversation, like, okay, like, of course I wasn't saying okay out loud, but even like this is like, Philip, you're on screen right now, going like, it's so obvious you're being told what to do. Um, and being able to modify on the fly and like just learning how to do that by the practice of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say you're critical, obviously, your own work?
Oh yes, so critical. It's funny. I think I do that anyway in just my life, but definitely in wrestling. You know, wrestlers are often their harshest critic. And on commentary, I'm always like, oh, you know, did that go well? I could have done this better. I could have said this better. But a lot of times on commentary, what's funny, I always say it's funny, and I'm like, it's not really funny, but I just keep using that phrase. Like this last weekend, I did two events I did commentary on: Real Shoot Wrestling in West Virginia and Federated Wrestling Alliance in Maryland. And during both of those events, wrestlers would come to me and go, how did I do in my match? And in my brain, as I watch a match on commentary, you're talking it. And so I'm not retaining. I'm very much, this is what's happening in the moment. Or if I'm talking about something I'm pulling from my brain, it's about the history of something, how a storyline is connected. And so then they're coming to me, well, how did my match do? And I'm like, that was 5 matches ago. I don't have that in my brain right now. It's like, I think I remember this happened. I remember there was this confusion. I don't remember what that was about. And I feel really bad for that sometimes, but it's very live and in the moment. And so you have to be that live in the moment. So when you're asked to recall from a couple matches ago, you're like,
That's brilliant. So, obviously, working in wrestling and stuff like that, do you get the chance to watch wrestling from like a fan's point of view, or do you really not get the chance to?
It's a different point of view, you know, being experienced in wrestling, and now having the time in the business, I know a lot of those people who were on television, and so it's a different kind of interaction. I find myself when I'm at home and wrestling is on, I often, depending on who it is, am not watching many of the matches. And I realized I didn't realize I was doing this until I like caught myself. I was looking up when they were talking. I was looking up when there was promos or there was a vignette or a segment more than I was some of the wrestling. Again, depending on the people. I will always turn on a Zack Sabre Jr. match. I will always turn on a Bryan Danielson match because that's my more favorite kind of wrestling. But I can watch any wrestling. I'm just saying, like in those moments though, if I'm like vegging out, and because typically if the television's on, I'm working on something else too at the same time. And so my focus is a little split. And so then when there's more intention, like, oh, let me look up and watch this. So I think I watch maybe from a different perspective. But I'm still a fan of it. I still, you know, want to know what happens next in the story.
I love the fact you said Zack Sabre Jr. because he's actually one of my favorites.
Finally, another one.
Well, he's from the UK and I'm from the UK as well. So
I mean, fair point. Fair point.
So you mentioned earlier, obviously, you work for obviously Wrestling Revolver, which is the owner is obviously somebody who I really respect in Sammy Calhoun. How did obviously that all start for you?
So Sammy and I have known each other since he started in wrestling. He came in after I did by a couple of years, and it's funny because I remember meeting him differently, and he interacted with me before I knew he was Sammy Callahan. Like he messaged me on MySpace. That's how long ago it was.
Wow.
Complimenting me on gear I had and wanted to know where I got it. And so for him, that's where our like friendship started. And I kind of remember like just talking, like reaching out and talking to him, like because I liked his work, which must have been a couple of years after that. So I'm like, it's weird how we both sort of remember meeting each other. But then we started working with each other at Pro Wrestling Syndicate, which was a smaller company in New York. that is no longer around, and then Combat Zone Wrestling, and that's really where we just became much closer friends. And so when he left to the WWE, we stayed in touch, and when he came back, he pulled me aside. Actually, we were at a CCW show, and he pulled me aside and was like, "Hey, I'm going to start this new company. It's called Wrestling Revolver, and I want you to be a part of it." He's like, "I don't know what that means yet," but I'm trying not to. I'm fighting myself from doing my Sammy impression, because everybody has one who works around Sammy. Even if you don't realize it, your voice starts to get a little more gravelly, and you just like all of a sudden you start talking like a pirate from the Midwest.
Please continue. Yeah, so and obviously I've seen obviously Wrestling Revolver. There's some really, really good talent on that card. I mean, the product to whole is really, really good. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm. It's saying that it is like when you look at it, like you have talent that come in from Impact, from AEW. You have some of the best independent wrestling talent in the world. Some of the people who are now coming up are also students of Sammy's, who a lot of people don't realize. Like Sammy had a lot of hands in the training of a lot of the people who are currently on top in Impact, an Ace Austin, a Trey Miguel, Zachary Wentz. I'm gonna keep calling him Desmond Xavier because it's Desmond Xavier. Joe Gacy, like he's had a direct hand on how some of these people were actually developed going into their wrestling careers and landing where they're at now. So seeing some of the newer talent that are coming up, like a Damian Chambers, a Crash Jackson, that are maybe not known around the wrestling world yet, but they're people who have had a direct impact by Sammy. But often because I'm both in front of the camera and behind the scenes, and because I'm so involved, sometimes I'm like, did we do good? Was today an okay? Like, because I can't think of it that way. It also, I think when I get happy, I'm like, oh, this is too satisfying. Like, we have to fix something. We have to make it better. Like, how do we keep making it better? And that's always been my impetus, a little bit of just how do you push it to be better the next time you see us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, sticking obviously with Callan as well, and you talked about promos earlier. I was just thinking then, one of my biggest things I actually like about Sammy is his promos. You know, I mean, there's so much passion behind it. I mean, you obviously know the guy personally and stuff like that. I mean, the guy as a talent is phenomenal. Let's be honest.
He is. He really is. And I'm smirking a little bit because this is now years ago. This is pre AEW when I say this story. When MJF was coming up, MJF moved to the Midwest for a little while and trained with Sammy. And we were at MCW Pro Wrestling in Maryland, and I'm helping MJF record a promo, and he records this promo, and I was like, I'm laughing, and he's like, Phil, why are you laughing? And like, because you just cut a Sammy Callahan promo. Everything you said, your spacing, your timing, your intonation was Sammy. It wasn't the same voice. It's your voice, but it was like your timing was exactly Sammy. And he's like, well, I am living out there. It makes sense. But it is. I mean, again, Sammy has that impact in the way he does it, and he can get intense too. Like when he wants something done a certain way, and when I mean intense, I don't mean it in a bad way. Like because he has such a passion and a creativity for wrestling, he's like, do it this way because this is going to be the impact. This is going to be what people see and take away from it. Deliver it this way. Like he really understands that.
Yeah, it was an incredible time. I mean, I could spark a whole hour about it because I'm a huge fan of his and stuff like that. So, sticking obviously with Wrestling Revolver and stuff like that, what's a typical show day for you then? Really, obviously, you've been involved in a lot of stuff.
So, a typical show day for me actually starts the day before the show. We've been very fortunate that the venues we've worked with, for the most part, will allow us to come in like the evening before and do some of our setup. So that helps to alleviate a lot of the pressure of the day of. Because it's interesting because Sammy and I balance each other in many ways. Like where one of us is creative in one way, the other one is creative in another way. Where one of us is very logistic, the other person's dealing with another part of the logistics. And so like he'll be running to do some of the making sure like the ring crew is set up. I'm helping do the entryway. We're setting up the projector to get ready for like everybody has an entrance video that's tied to music. So we're setting that up at the same time. Sammy also deals with like the merch and the entrance and how that is set up. and so that way the day before you get maybe 75% of everything done. And then the day of, you're dealing with sort of the smaller stuff, but that leaves the room. Then when problems happen, you can start troubleshooting, and you've given yourself some time and leeway to be able to do that. Like Takesha's flight isn't gonna come from Atlanta anymore, day of a show, and now Takesha's stuck in Atlanta. So now he needs help, and we have to figure out something on the event because we promised a match. What are we gonna do? And so like, hey Phil, can you do this? And I'm gonna deal with the talent. So we've been able to balance each other in that respects. I will say, hands down, Sammy also, as a creative individual, does the majority of the video work that you see and the graphic work that you see. I can do some. I'm not as skilled as he is at that, but I can do it. So like day of show, when it's like, oh, we're putting somebody else on the event that we didn't announce or talk about, and so Philip, we need an entrance video. I can make entrance videos now that I couldn't do that a few years ago. Now I know how to do that and do it much better than I used to. So
there you go. So when you look back, obviously, at your career now and stuff like that, what's some of your moments where you look back going, I'm proud of that?
I mean, Wrestling Revolver is one of them. You know, it's a company I've been with since day one. It really helped to start, to help market, because you know, just having names on an event don't bring a crowd. Like you have to promote and put it out there. Like, hey, come see us, and come take part of that. So I'm really proud of where Revolver has gone. Wow, that's a really good question. Doing the indie calendar, it's weird because it's like it's meant so much to a lot of people that people get to go there, both fans to find events and talent to find work. Like, and I didn't really realize it was going to have as big of an impact as it has had to people. And so I'm glad that has left a mark, at least. The last couple WrestleManias, I've gotten a lot of attention because I'll track like everything that's happening, and like I'll combine from all the different sources I can find to like, here's the everything of everything I can find for WrestleMania weekend, or week, and that seems to surprise people. I'm like, well, I didn't think it was that difficult to do, but okay, here you go. Yeah, so I would say some of the even the things that haven't gone well, I will say I try to learn from. You know, when I first got with when I started with Pro Wrestling Unplugged, that was like my first big major company. I would say, like, had a much larger audience, a different kind of perspective, ran at the ECW arena, like very different kind of vibe. And it was like it opened up my eyes to a lot of things and made bigger connections for me. And then when I went to CZW, it was, you know, very similar in that respect. And though I did not leave CZW with a good taste in my mouth, it also just gave me a different appreciation for like, this is how you can put on a better production. This is how you put on, even on an independent wrestling level, something that showcases better and showcases better talent better.
Absolutely. So I was looking obviously at the shows for obviously Revolver and stuff like that. And one has just caught my eye and stuff like that. Talk about the co-promotion with House of Glory.
So over WrestleMania weekend, we worked, Revolver and House of Glory put on a WrestleMania event in Philadelphia. It was so much. It was just fun. The venue itself was a church, and it's an active church. But they rent it out as an event space, and so we walk in, and it's just this beautiful, like 150-year-old church, and all of a sudden we start converting it into a wrestling venue, and it was funny because the church, the folks from the church, like knew we were coming. It wasn't like a shock. They knew we were having a wrestling event. But even for them to see how we started to convert, and set up chairs and we had very minimal lighting though there, but the church was so beautifully lit by itself. It had a lot of amazing natural light and stained glass windows. It had a really kind of cool vibe, and that's kind of how we rode the day. It was just this cool thing. Even like, so I'm over like basically running, instead of, we didn't have our video wall there, but we had sound running. And about 2 matches in comes Thunder Rosa, full face paint on, sits down next to me. She's like, do you mind if I sit here? I'm like, no, please. She's like, I want to ring the bell. Can I just ring the bell? It's like, absolutely, you can ring the bell. She wanted to do it, like, and she was just great. She just wanted to be a part because the atmosphere was just so lively. and I've had met Red before. Red's always amazing to work with. I had never worked with Charles Mason before, and he's friggin' scary. And seeing him and Steve Macklin up close, just demolishing one another, literally going. So it was a Philadelphia street fight that literally went into the street of Philadelphia. There's a clip that we have on our social media where they fight into the roadway outside of the church. That was not planned. That was a car that they actually fought in front of and got thrown on. That like was not expected. Like it was like, oh my God, this is really happening right now.
Yeah, I love the fact you said Mason, because his character really scares me, and you just look at him. Do you know what I mean?
But it's intense, and I mean the intensity level is what is so powerful to me, because I know so many people who were like, I'm crazy guy. No, like the intensity of Charles Mason makes you feel and know that he probably needs some psychological assistance.
This is brilliant. A few little more questions as we also begin to wind down and stuff like that. So here we are. Obviously now you've done so much obviously in your career and stuff like that. What's the goals for the rest of the year and obviously going into 2025 for you?
I've been very fortunate. So, coming out of the pandemic, I will say like bookings felt a little slower for a while. And really this year was the first full year I felt like, okay, much more is happening. Even since August, I don't think I've had a weekend without wrestling. And many of my weekends have had multiple events. So like, I feel really good about that. I'm really happy that like, okay, I feel like there's more revving up to come. So for 2024, we have 2 more Revolver events, both in December. I have 4 more MCW Pro Wrestling events out in Maryland. And then some other events peppered throughout, like Regal Shoot Wrestling in West Virginia. 2025, I feel like my brain's like, I know this, and I can't talk about it. I can't talk about that either. Because there are things in the works. And when you start spoiling it, and then it like, what I have learned in wrestling is like you work towards better success, and then sometimes you get derailed unexpectedly. So like, oh hey, this thing is gonna come. Oh wait a minute, but we never signed the ink on it, and now something has changed. So like I'm hesitant to be like, so I am hopeful with Revolver. There's a larger audience presence. I'm hopeful that means not just live in-person events, the number of events, the way we are seen by people. I hope all of that increases and continues to get better. MCW, so I talk about MCW too because physically they're my closest promotion. They're in the same state I'm in here in the States, and they have over the last few years really been upping their production look. They've always been pretty good at it, especially on the independent level, but they keep adding a little bit more year after year, even event after event. Like, how can we tweak? How can we be better? So visually, they put on a better wrestling spectacle. And it's interesting because Revolver and MCW are 2 very audience types. MCW is super family friendly. Like 50% of our audience are kids. That is Revolver is made for. Yeah. I'm not going to say super mature. Like, yes, we have death matches, but they're not every event. Like, we build up to those matches. And so it's a different kind of crowd. There are kids in the crowd, with the understanding that their parents are there and like they're understanding what they're going to get. But it's a different kind of energy. And so I'm trying to find ways in some of the promotions I work with. How can I instill the energy that Revolver has into what you're doing? And how can I help you? If they're asking me, like, this is what I'm seeing, this is where the potential is to improve your quality and to be better. And really, that's at the end of the day what you all want. Everybody wants to be better and have a better footprint, have more people there, have a better production, have a better appearance, be perceived as being better. So you have to work to get there.
Absolutely. And anybody listening, I do recommend Wrestling Revolver. You know what I mean? I've seen a lot of their stuff, incredible stuff and like that. So, I mean, I cannot speak highly enough about them. So, one final question for obviously we do his outro and stuff like that. What's the biggest thing, obviously, being in wrestling, you've obviously learned?
Ooh. Expect the unexpected for sure. And again, this might just be me. I'd like to believe I'm a responsible person. I'm hesitant almost to say responsible adult because I also tell people I'm the world's oldest 10-year-old. But you have to learn how to adjust and go with the flow of things. Where do you take responsibility for the things that are happening around you? Your transportation is having an issue. Okay, what's going on? Like, okay, it's delayed to this point. How are you working on it before you try to call somebody else who's hours away, trying to figure out what's happening for the first time that they're hearing about it? Like, what is it that you can work out first, if possible? If it's possible, if it's not, you have to. Okay, great. Then this is what you have to do. That also means like even just simply like, oh, bell time is this, call time is this for the promoter. They want me there by this. That means I have to leave so much early. Let me give myself an extra 30 minutes. So if I hit traffic or something, I give myself a little bit of leeway. Like you just have to be able to go with the flow. There have been so many, both for myself as a talent in front of the camera and then behind the scenes where it's been like, this is what's happening on this event. And we get there. Oh, this person broke their ankle. They're not going to be there. Oh, Phil, you fell off a ladder during setup and tore your ACL. So we're going to pivot. Yeah, that's how I tore my ACL, by the way, during setup at Revolver.
Before we obviously head off, Phil, is there anything you'd like to plug, my friend?
You can certainly check me out on all social media platforms at Trust in Phil. That's everywhere. So on X, Facebook, Twitter, X, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, not LinkedIn. I keep wanting to say LinkedIn. I'm not on LinkedIn. Instagram, I'm there at Trust in Phil.
Awesome. Like I said, don't forget to check out Wrestling Revolver. Do you know what I mean? There's tons of stuff. What we'll do is we'll put all the links in, obviously, in the description of this video, so you can go check it out yourself. Phil, it's been an absolute blast, mate. Hope you've had a good little chat.
I did. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. Cheers for watching, guys.